Hi, and welcome to the tnkgrl Mobile Podcast oh yes,
I didn't even know that actually.
Yes, so I have a special guest today, as you probably have noticed. Scott Croyle of NextBit is here.
Hi, Miriam.
Scott. Stoked you said it was like, we want to try. I did get on podcast 113. I did not do this on purpose. And we talked a little bit briefly about with Andrew Martinek of Android Central, but we had so many. We went over the summer's phones, and kind of yayed and nayed them.
Did we get a yay or nay?
Of course, you guys yayed unanimously. By the way,
oh, that's
everyone, great. Which was just two of us. But it still counts. So we want to talk about NextBit, and we didn't, we went over the general thing. So maybe you can walk us through and show us some stuff. But after that, I kind of want to talk about design, because you guys are really pushing the envelope, and I want to know what your feelings are about the state of the industry in terms of design. And maybe we can go through some of the summer phones together, and you can say yay or nay, and maybe from a design perspective. And
totally.
You know what, that's competition. It's how it works. People need to know what the people are that are out there and at the forefront of design in the mobile space think of what's going on.
Well, I think just as a general note, I think that the great thing about what's happening, particularly on the Android side, is that there's a lot of choice for people.
Yep.
And that's cool. That means that you don't have to be everything for everybody. And I think that's a lot of times where I think companies get hung up, is trying to be that everything for everybody. You don't have to do that. There's actually enough room to kind of have a unique character and a unique voice, which is something we try to do here.
Yep. So tell us about the idea behind NextBit. And more importantly, there's NextBit, the platform, right? Mm-hmm. There is this cloud-based, never have to worry about storage platform. And of course, it does more than that. And you can walk us through that. But I'm really interested in the phone. And the phone is so unique and so refreshing, especially in the very refreshing color.
Yeah.
What is it? Mint something?
Mint. Yeah, there's a mint and midnight version.
There you go. So yeah, feel free to show them. Obviously, I didn't have them on the podcast last time. So this is the NextBit Robin. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous phone. And this is the mint color.
With a flag. What is it?
Scott used to work for HTC and design almost all of their phones.
No, I didn't design them, but I was
a lot of them.
I had a big team. We had a big team at HTC, and it's not just designers. We had designers, engineers, we had CEOs that all wanted to have a say in the design process. So, I'm not going to lay claim to anything, but I am proud of the time that I spent there. We did from the acquisition of. I had two business partners, and we had a design consultancy called One & Company. Mm-hmm. And from the time I joined HTC to the time I left, we established HTC as a design-driven, people-centric brand. And I think that was different when we first started. People don't remember this, but it was Windows Phone. This was the smartphone before there were smartphones. And they were kind of these
Diamond.
Exactly. They were very geeky until all of a sudden Diamond came out, and iPhone came out right around the same time. And it was like, we had this vision that this could be a mass market play, not just a niche play, putting the internet in everybody's pocket as opposed to like walking around with just doing voice and text messages. So when this design process, so just speaking a little bit about HTC, you get a lot of inputs.
Yeah.
You get inputs not only from internal stakeholders, people like Peter and Cher, the CEO and chairwoman, but also like just regional sales heads, and they're getting feedback from their not customers, but their customers, carriers. And I think that actually highlights a big problem for the existing big OEM players. Is that they're not selling to consumers, they're selling to carriers. So it's the ultimate gatekeepers.
Do you think that's changing though?
I think it's changing to a large extent. They definitely lost a lot of power, but even so, I look at some of the recent launches at Verizon and some of the bloatware that's still loaded on there. It's still a mess. And you look at that stuff and I don't want.
Since I like to put blame on people, I'm going to put this logo out on the screen right now. Hi, Verizon. Thanks for bloating your phones.
Well, so, I think, first of all, Verizon, one of the best networks in the United States. I think without a doubt, I think we all love what they do there. But I think a lot of consumers, there's some consumers that find value in their service, but a lot of consumers don't see the value, and you can't take it off. It just feels like it's, polluting the device. And so I think if you look at kind of where all those inputs come from when you're at a big OEM selling to carriers, it's difficult. It's difficult to hold true. Like I think back to products like Diamond and Legend and Incredible. M7 was easy because by that point we obviously established ourselves as a brand, and it was a remarkable kind of breakthrough in terms of physical technology, the kind of the metal all metal enclosure. But those early things, they had very provocative design gestures.
I love the Diamond. I think that that shaped back, like nobody's done anything quite like that. I mean, why not do something like that today?
So with this design process, I wanted to do something that I just want to put all that stuff aside. And I've been an Android for a long time. I consider myself an Android enthusiast. I might have a different value system than every other Android enthusiast out there, but we all have our different trigger points. And so I wanted to create something that Tom and Mike and I and the team here at Nextbit would be like, yeah, that's the phone that I want. And there were a couple things. Yeah, I wanted great specs. I wanted great battery life. I wanted a good camera. I wanted something that still was kind of holdable in my hand and still kind of back pocketable for me. And Tom he's a front pocket guy. So we wanted something that kind of fit all those parameters. But we also want something that would stand out. You were asking me about the state of design out there. And honestly, if I put the iPhone and every Android phone out on this table, you'd be hard pressed to have them stick out.
Yep.
Hard pressed. They've got a rounded corner. Maybe they have a slight loft on the top. It's either a flat stack like what the iPhone has, or it's got the lofted back like what HTC really innovated on, or the kind of the third kind of thing you see is what we did on 1X, where it was kind of flat but it tapered off the side. There's kind of everything kind of falls into the same. And because 7 and then Apple, what you found or what you see in the industry is that the overall quality level, meaning execution, not design quality, but the overall execution level, it's gone up. People can do metal. They can do that antenna. They can do the zero gap construction, and I think that's great. But what it's meant is that a lot of people are fast following.
Yep.
And there's no differentiation.
I mean, Huawei's doing the zero gap. Well, of course, Apple copied. And by the way, you heard Scott. Apple copied HTC for that. I think a lot of people just don't get it. But,
that's okay. HTC probably copied a lot of things from Apple. It's, like as a designer, there's a lot of different references you pick up from. So it's not to be critical of them.
No, but it's interesting because, you guys came out with the zero gap first. Then I noticed, I think the next player to come out with it was Nokia, actually, with the 925, which had elements of the zero gap in its edges. And then it was the iPhone 6. Well, before that, actually, the Moto X. Just a little bit further.
Kind of.
Again, it's just the edge, right?
Yeah,
it's not the back. And then, of course, the iPhone 6, and then more recently the A9. Well, the M8, the M9, and then the A9. HTC still. But Huawei's been doing it now. And then, of course, Samsung did it with the GS6 and the Note.
Yeah, that's right. So I mean, I just don't look. Some of these phones are beautiful and they're executed very well. You look at them and you're like, oh, this is a quality. It feels very quality. But I wanted to kind of get the premium feeling from somewhere else. And so if you look at kind of a list of attributes that you're trying to talk about, one is materials, one is premium, one is character. And like all these things are kind of super important. All of them are important. But I think you can get premium from other places than just say, make it metal and put a chamfer on there, make it shiny.
Yep.
That's like, to me, that feels with the state of design industry and the amount of phones coming out today, it feels lazy to me that that's the only way to create something original. I was wow.
Exactly.
It wasn't terrific, but it was a shot in the arm that, like, as we as designers at HTC, I remember thinking, okay, we can do something like that. We can do, if anybody's got the capability
the
to do
1X
that.
came out after, right? So you kind of inspired a little bit, maybe. That to me was a milestone in terms of using a matte finish.
Yeah,
and
we had
kind
that
of
gloss,
unibody polycarbonate, the edge being kind of glossy. I think that was really a delightful looking phone.
Yeah, that was a nice phone. We launched the 1S at the same
It's
time.
also, and like, what is it, coated in some kind of laser?
Yeah, micro arc
plasma.
anodization.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with this phone, we wanted to get a premium nature for somewhere else. So actually, we kind of took approach. This is I'm gonna go designer dorky on you here a little bit.
That's what you're here for. Let's do it.
But if you're actually kind of like to break down what the design is, you have a screen on a phone, right? What shape is your screen?
Rectangular.
It's
right
rectangular.
now.
So it starts with that. It starts with the idea that my screen is rectangular, and I'm going to go up from that. And rectangular, let closure on, kind of the austere, you know, like actually be kind of quite cold and kind of uncharacter. Actually, again, I'm going to use some designer dorky words here, but we wanted something that was approachable. We wanted something that was friendly. And so we had these kind of soft recesses on the initial concept over the receiver detail here, this area here. And all of a sudden, the phone started to not feel austere, but it started to feel like it had actually not a toy-like appearance. I have seen some people call it like a toy, but there is like kind of playful naivete about it.
Yes.
Where it almost feels kind of like deliberately simplified. And then all of a sudden we're like, oh, you know what? We got these kind of playful buttons on the side with a splash of color. And then our original kind of camera details and sensor details and the camera flashes, they were not like this. They felt a little bit more conventional. But as we started working with Foxconn on the implementation, we kind of arrived at this point where like, oh, you know, what if we just make everything the same size? And now all of a sudden, even though there's two sensors in there, and we could do two separate holes, like a lot of the manufacturers, you know, there's a camera sensor and there's proximity sensor. We could do two separate places like iPhone's done in the past or other manufacturers done in the past. You see them sometimes you'll see them on either side. And we did all these explorations, but all of a sudden we arrived on this detail where, oh, they're just the same, actually. And now all of a sudden we had something that started to kind of even take it to the next level of having kind of this repeated circle motif. Again, if you come in here to the back and we look at the camera and flash,
there's a symmetry there from the front to the back.
It's a symmetry.
Delightful.
Yeah, exactly. And then just the fact that, you know, let's make the flash a little bit deliberately large. The LEDs are actually the same size as any other LEDs in there, but now all of a sudden you start to have like a design gesture.
And I love that you
really makes
squeeze
sense.
the headphone jack right next to that, right there.
That's right. That's right. So, so I think that, you know, from a design perspective, like, again, I come back to this fact that like I wanted something that felt very, very different. Like there's a reason why you have those glasses, I have these glasses. I'm wearing an orange hoodie and you're wearing a t-shirt. We make all these purchases in our life and they reflect something about who we are. Even if it's like, you know, I don't care what it looks like, I'm going to buy that. That says something about who you are. It's being critical, but I wanted something that kind of expressed my values as a person. And I think there's enough people out there where they're looking for something like that. They're looking for something a little bit different, something that's fresh, something that has a unique voice. Doesn't have to be showy. Diamond was very, very showy. We were kind of looking to express something differently, and it felt right at the time back then. But I wanted something that was very clean, that was very modern, but still had a lot of character.
So you continued the round motif right here on the edges. I don't know if you guys can see, but the volume rocker is right here, right? And then you had to elongate the circle a bit for the fingerprint scanner, which is also the power lock key, right?
Yeah, and right next to it, then you have the SIM card. So you have two lozenges on
but
that side.
That at least is somewhat hidden, the SIM, right?
Yeah, we've chosen the mark color.
Guys, it feels so good in hand.
But so this is something.
I can walk out with that now.
Yeah, this is something that I'm telling you, like I've just worked on a lot of phones and I've heard a lot of different stakeholders. And you go into meetings, I mean, even on like the M7 and M8, oh, it's too sharp, it's too round, it falls out of my hands. It's, you know, what? These are all relevant inputs.
Everybody has an opinion.
And that's fine. And they are valid opinions. It's not to diminish them. But you have to, like, you can imagine that I've got like there's a 1,000 different inputs, 1,000 different inputs. And you as a company and a product lead have to figure out where is that going to sit on my value system.
Yep.
and what do we want to, what's valuable to us, or what's expressive to us, and what are we going to make a trade-off? And we actually felt like we could go with sharper edges because of where we had the power button, where we put the proximity sensor. So you're not actually traveling up and down like you are on an iPhone, say, or any of the other Android phones that are put it down low. We put it in kind of what we would consider a natural place to be. We also intentionally went with a smaller screen than I think what you typically see out of a startup company like us. We went with 5.2. That felt to us the sweet spot for what we wanted to carry.
It doesn't look that big. That's the thing that I'm always surprised about. It's like, it always feels like a 5-inch phone to me, but it's 5.2. Yeah.
I think one thing that helps there is one of the big breakthroughs. You're like, oh, it's just a plastic housing. There's not as much break. They actually beam stuff up to close to the screen like this is very, very tricky.
Yeah, well, the bezel's really thin, right?
The bezel's thin.
I'm not sure how close
well,
the
you can
screen
see it.
actually,
That's a cosmetic mock-up. But if I show this one here, I don't think there's like, it's not like remarkable how thin.
Show it on the screen.
It's not remarkable how thin this border is. But if you look at top and bottom, it is pretty close. You'll see borders that are on the top that are like this, but you won't see this very often down here where we have this plastic kind of right up to the screen edge. But that does help kind of what we like in design. So it helps shorten the design and make it feel not so big. I think also graphically, you start breaking up colors and it helps kind of reduce.
Yeah, I really love the two-toneness of it all for me. It's definitely more obvious on this one than on the other one if you want to.
Yeah, so the midnight one, you know, so with midnight, so there's a lot of people that love color. You're obviously one of them. I'm one of them.
See my shoes.
Yeah, exactly.
Your shoes.
Mine too. But the reality is that there's a lot of people that are actually a little bit more conservative, or maybe they're not conservative on their hoodie, but they want to have a phone that actually doesn't feel
radar
exactly. Yep. So we wanted something that, you know, traditionally you would do something in black. This actually on camera, it'll look black. But when you pick this phone up, what you'll realize that it's actually not black. It's actually a very deep blue. And then that starts to get enhanced by just one color splash over here on the fingerprint sensor and power button.
In the trademarked next bit color.
Yeah, exactly. And that's like having a Paul Smith jacket where you open it up and you got the little lining or something. It's just a secret little thing that says, you know what, I do want something a little bit special. So but you know what, if I'm in a business meeting, it's not gonna frighten
anybody. You didn't do the volume rocker that way.
No, it felt too much.
Really just
the high contrast actually starts to make it feel really toy-like.
Right.
And so we started kind of thinking about, and we looked at it for sure. At the end of the day, we ended up with something like this.
That's great. So you also went with dual speakers. These are stereo, right?
It's just stereo speakers and dual amplifiers.
Cool.
You know, I'm sure you've been out a lot. You're out with friends and you want to share a video with them. To me, it just feels, yes, you can get volume out of other phones. I think iPhone's particularly loud, but we find that the sound quality and the volume is much better on something like this. Because not only do you have two speakers, but you can also point them at the person.
Right. I mean, given the option, I'd always want to have two speakers. But I mean, you know, oftentimes it's not as high on the priority list for me as other things.
Agreed.
So, and I think that priority list is mine. It's very different than other people's.
So, for sure.
With the A9, they removed the boom sound dual speaker setup, and the mono speaker is great. But as you said, it's like the iPhone. It's good, but it's not stereo. And a lot of people complain, right? Obviously, they're like, well, that's what your thing is.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I understand why HTC did it, right? Like, I mean, you know.
Well, so I'm not so sure about that particular decision because maybe it was from a price point perspective, or maybe they felt like they were competing with real estate on for the fingerprint sensor. But we feel like, and by the way, when we started out with the idea that we wanted dual front-facing speakers, and we added in fingerprint sensor a little bit through the process.
I don't know how much you want to talk about the A9, but if you do, it's here. And I think, honestly, that they were going after something that would look and feel like an iPhone. For better or for worse, I personally am not offended and upset by it. Some people really are. In that sense, I can understand the decisions they made. But, yeah.
So I wasn't there. I actually left before this concept was even presented.
You were still there for the M9 part of it, right?
M8.
M8
was I left last April. So I'd maybe seen an initial sketch of the M9, but you know, so many things change between the actual sketch. So I think on the dual front facing speakers, I suspect that they had a decision, which is to put, again, I'm just talking out, I have no idea. But I could just suspect that they had this decision of putting the fingerprint sensor on the side or putting it on the front. And like, well, the conventional wisdom seems to put it down low. And so rather than take a risk, they basically jettison the speaker. Again, I don't know what, but so coming back to design.
It's interesting too that they went not symmetric for this, for the USB port, but they did go symmetric for the camera.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting choice in my opinion.
Yeah.
But anyway.
So I'm not offended by the design. I can tell
I'm not
you
either, but a lot of people
I know
are.
the design team, and I know for a fact that they would never have started out wanting to create something like an iPhone. That was not the DNA that we established there. Which I think that's probably what people react most strongly to, is that that's not the DNA of that team. And so I think there's this question of like, how did they end up there? You know, how do you end up in a spot where...
I think it was deliberate. I think that they just said, well, we've tried a bunch of things. Let's see if this works.
Yeah.
But in terms of the phone, I like it a lot. I think it's one of the things they nailed is user experience over specs.
Yeah.
Which I think you guys nailed too. You know, arguably when you ship this to backers, your specs will be a bit mid-range, and that's fine because you know what? It's like laptops nowadays. You can buy almost any laptop.
Yeah. Intel inside versus why focus on the...
It's rock solid, right?
800 versus 600. Why does it matter?
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I think the phone feels good, and of course it's well executed, but it doesn't stand out. And I'll be honest with you. I think looking at HTC and the DNA of that company, which is about design or was about design, that phone doesn't. I think it definitely does not help.
So what about the
So
design
it'll be interesting
line?
to see the M10. So the design line's pretty fresh,
I'm actually
right?
more excited about the design line because
I agree.
look, the M7 I was just excited about because you tried something radically new and you executed so well. The M8 I was kind of like, okay, I'm getting over this now. And the M9 I was like, I'm so done with this design. Even though the silver and gold, oh my god, that silver and gold, I want silver and gold A9 now, but. The thing is, the Desire has never bored me. The Desire stays fresh. I just reviewed the 620? No, 626.
I don't know which one that is.
It's the latest, like, $80, $90 price point, prepaid carrier type Desire. And not only is it a relatively well-spec'd phone for the money, but the design is very much in line with the 816 you worked on and 820.
So there were a few phones, too, that you could kind of get through or nobody's paying attention. And that was one of them from the Desire line.
I paid attention.
No, I'm talking about internally at HTC.
Like that 816
like, it's just the Desire line.
Such a breath of fresh air. Remember, I was there. It was one of your last things. I was at Mobile Congress.
It was fresh. Well, I think the BR9 for me, there's one they lost is that, sure. I think you're right. It's well executed, it's well proportioned, feels a little bit like a copy. But that to me is not the way for success. If you come back to the wider ecosystem, the people that are going to be successful, they're going to either compete on price.
Yeah.
I think Xiaomi, OnePlus are a great example like that, or you got to compete on something else.
And design has always been HTC's
design. And if you think you're going to win on brand, that is not HTC's strength. They're not going to win that battle because they don't have enough money to spend on it. Number one. Number two is it's clear that over the years they haven't executed well in terms of brand. I can tell you once we get offline, I'll tell you tons of stories about what a cluster that was. But
you guys won't be here for this one.
But it was it's a struggle with a company. The other
devices. It was the way they were marketed, and some of the seemed to be there was some lack of vision around that. I still think that exists a little bit, and
for sure.
But that's true of others. Like Samsung had the opposite problem. They had great marketing, even though it was very Me Too marketing.
Design.
But for a long time, to me, I've said this many times, like Galaxy S2, then Galaxy S6.
What happened in between?
But I called them turds. I just didn't like the design at all. I felt like it wasn't just the look and feel, it was the materials and the execution.
So I would say that their execution has gotten better. I still don't, I'm not fond of the design. There's nothing kind of unique about it. It feels pretty anonymous.
It's not emotional, But
it's executed fine.
I appreciate that it's very functional.
Yes, it
just,
is.
It works. It's beautifully made. It feels like you spend your $650 wisely.
Yep, I would agree with that. I would agree. It's definitely well
basically,
constructed.
and that is much better to me than the
Where they
alternative,
were with
which
the
was
S3
like,
and
oh my
S4.
god. And a lot of people are like, why the S2? Because the S2, even though it was a completely plastic phone, it introduced a bit more of that square personality that for a bit of time Samsung tried and are now going back to with the GS6 and Note 5, that I felt differentiated it from what they'd done before, because the Galaxy S was essentially an iPhone copy.
You know, it's funny. I don't see the difference. I don't see it as clearly as you do. I generally speaking have, I've yet to see a Samsung phone that I really like.
Yeah.
So, but I do feel like the quality level, what they've improved to, has gotten much, much better. So which I think is.
Let's speak to that for a second. What are the phones that stand out in time that are not necessarily with HD, that phones you didn't work on, that you feel were like, oh, this got my attention?
Well, I think the Lumia, I mean, we mentioned the Lumia earlier. That was definitely one that had a big impact on me because at the time, I think we were doing some fresh stuff and they came out of nowhere. I'm like, wow.
That's Peter Skillman's
that
team,
was,
right? Have you met Peter Skillman?
Yeah, I know Peter Skillman, but he didn't drive.
He
didn't drive the
software,
design. Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
I might like Peter. I just don't want to. There was a big design team that worked on that. But I think, you know, I think as they took that language and they tried to put it on a lot of different other phones, I think it struggled. It didn't kind of hold up.
No.
But I think on the very first one, I felt solid. You remember how it was kind of small and tight, and it was good. Yeah. What other phones?
Yeah. What stands out for you? I mean, you know,
the very first iPhone, I was like, you know, to me, like people again they don't remember this, but actually, if you back up even further, the first iPod, like everybody thinks that Apple's like, oh, being this mass consumer brand, it only worked on a Mac, which meant that
I have that one.
Which meant that people at the time were generally designers because those were the only people that were buying Macs.
Yeah,
that was the first iPod, and it wasn't really till it worked on Windows. Then all of a sudden it became a really huge thing. And so when the first iPhone came out, I was like, oh wow, because it was something that we tried later on with Legend, you know, with the kind of metal unibody and the plastic bottom. And I thought that they
glass
did,
front.
And
Very
the
few
front.
phones at the time.
Oh, that was
had
the
glass
big
front.
Yeah, that and the capacitive touchscreen was pretty remarkable. I will say the iPhone 2 I like. iPhone
4 was significant because it had stainless steel on the edges,
which
nobody had done before, and glass front and back.
It did. I'm gonna get real kind of deep around brand and design.
Dieter and I talked about this once.
It lacks the warmth that Apple used to have.
It's very brawn. Right?
Yes, very brawn. So actually, but that's a big part of Apple's aesthetic. But generally speaking, like if I look at your MacBook Air or something, it's got a lofted back, which brings a little bit of friendliness to it. In fact, I feel like Apple. So great products. So somebody recently actually started making sounds. You started getting some warmth from it. You started to get its personality. I do feel like Apple. I think they're moving in the right direction with iPhone 6 because it feels like it's gotten a little bit more warm. But I felt like for a while it's gotten very, very cold. Number one. Number two is they're stuck. They're clearly stuck where they're like, we're just going to keep doing the same thing over and over again. And it's it lacks freshness. And by the way, we see people that are interested in Nextbit that are looking for something, not just from Android users, but from Apple users, and they're looking for one of two things. Number one is the vast majority, or one of two, three things. The vast majority of people that buy an iPhone buy a 16 gig iPhone.
Yeah.
And that means if you're like a young person,
you should talk about
terrible user experience. So if you get an iPhone, you're 16 years old or you're 20 years old, whatever age you are, you get an iPhone and you download apps. And by the way, apps are getting bigger. You know, they've got 4 gig apps now. So you download 1 or 2 games, it takes a little bit few photos, you're full. So that essentially means that you have a feature phone within 3 months.
Yeah.
You don't have a smartphone anymore.
It's terrible. It's
And
terrible user experience. I
that's
don't even
right.
know why they do it.
That's right. And so well, they do it because they're trying to hit a price point. It's
Right.
it's pretty straightforward.
That way, people spend an extra $100 for the 64 gig, and
they don't even know if they need it.
They can advertise it as a 16.
And they don't even know if they need the 64 gig. But you're like, well, that 16 gig was so terrible. Maybe I should get 64. I don't know. You have to make this decision around $100. And I know the pricing of the storage. They are making a killing.
Oh, I know.
They are making a killing off of that $100 upgrade. Anyway, the point is that when you're at a concert and you're filming, let's say you're filming your favorite band, or or maybe you're filming your kids doing something, whatever it is you're filming, and you let go of that button, and it says, oh, can't store the video because you're out of space. First of all, you've lost the video that you wanted to record, number one. Number two is you've lost the moment.
Yes.
It's gone. And the reality is that you have the cloud. You can store all this stuff up in the cloud, whether it's iCloud or Google Drive or Dropbox or whatever your favorite storage app is. But generally speaking, it requires active management.
Yeah.
And in that moment, you're like, okay, I'll delete some stuff. I'm gonna go to my gallery. I'm like, first maybe I should delete the black images or blurry images, and okay, maybe I have 6 images of that one. You have to sit down and do it. Number one. Number two is I'm gonna go into apps. Clearly, there's some apps on my phone that I'm not using. Go through. Oh, there's Angry Birds. I haven't played that in 3 months, but I was on level 60. I might get bored at some point. I don't really want to delete that. So all of a sudden, again, you're out of the moment, and you're kind of making these kind of decisions. And so when we started working on Nextbit, I think that was one of the things. If you move beyond like, oh, we're doing a cloud first phone, what we wanted to do was use that kind of approach to solve a very basic problem, which is that your phone runs out of space. We had the cloud. iOS and Android weren't developed in an era with the cloud, but if you take that thinking and you bake it into the OS, you can create this kind of magical experience where it's kind of like a half generation. These speeds, we don't have ubiquitous Wi-Fi, but it's a half generation step that if we do it smartly, like for example, the phone, we'll leave behind a shadow icon so it still looks like it's all there.
Yeah.
By the way, we also leave behind the credentials on the phone.
All the settings
exactly.
And
it's gone.
Game level.
But the APK is gone. And then if you need that thing, you need the app again, you're like, oh, you tap it, it restores, hooks back up the credentials, and it's like it's never been removed. So it's hybrid.
Yep.
Feels like a cloud OS, but it's not. Actually, we've done it in a very kind of straightforward way with Android. We think that solves a major pain point, and we think that's the tip of the iceberg where you can use the cloud to solve significant major pain points at people, and you can adaptively do it based on how they're using the phone and help people actually exceed the specs of their phone. There's no reason why you should go out today and spend $700 or $800 because you think you're going to run out of space in a year.
Right.
You should actually be able to buy that now. Say you get a 32 gigabyte phone and get 100 gigabytes cloud with it. You'll be fine. You're going to be in great shape. So it's really the first phone that's designed to never run out of space.
And you have an indicator in the back, which I think is really great.
Yeah. So we have these 4 LEDs on the back. They're not hooked up to the drivers yet, but these sort of things and the few changes that we made in the launcher, those are there to help us communicate to people. It's a new, I understand, I don't know. Yeah. When you're first plugged in on your Wi-Fi and you've got new apps that need to be synchronized, we light them up. When you actually run out of space and we're removing some off your phone, we light them up.
Yeah.
If we're restoring something when it's done, we can light them up. So it just gives us a way to kind of communicate to people kind of what we're doing and give some comfort level on this kind of new technology.
No, I'm really excited.
It also creates some poetry, by the way. I like to just a little simple.
I'm excited to see it in action, and more importantly, my biggest concern is not the technical aspect. I think as an engineer, I think it's a very sound approach. My concern is, can the networks keep up? Can it work seamlessly well enough for most people? And I'm sure you guys are working really hard on making that completely transparent.
Well, I think that if we do our job well, And you can imagine our adaptive engine will get better and better over time. It's pretty simple right now. It basically looks like you're using your phone. It puts everything into a queue.
Yeah.
So we really will downsample photos that you haven't looked at in 8 months. You know what I mean? It'll be like that. It will pick an app that you're like, you know what? Miriam hasn't looked at this thing in 6 months.
That's great.
But eventually you can get to a point where that adaptive engine could be even smarter, where maybe you can be looking at the calendar like, oh, you know what? Every Thursday night, Miriam has Uber. Every other time she doesn't. So why don't we move that on and off?
Yeah.
Why don't you move that on and off the phone? So that's of course, that's looking kind of much further downstream. Sure. But if we do our job well, the chances of kind of hitting the situation that we're talking. By the way, it's still 32. You have widgets installed. We're not going to remove that app for that particular app. So we try to be kind of smart about what we're doing there.
Can you pin content as well?
You can't pin content right now. But with photos, all we're doing right now is photos and apps. We'll do videos. First quarter, right? Screen res, sharing your friends.
That photo as it's no
like in the gallery.
As a so on my phone all the time. But at least that I know that it's not full res right now, and I need it full res, and I can request it full res.
Yeah, that's good feedback. Right now, we don't have that icon. The only way you would know is by zooming in on the photo, and then you realize. Then all of a sudden, you're like, oh, wait, now it's coming down. It pulled down the extra meg or two that that would come down. So right now, it doesn't do that, but I think it's good feedback. And we had that feature in there earlier. And we're like, we have a screen res, probably don't need it. But
it's funny because we dealt with these issues as video game developers 10, 15 years ago when I was a game developer with level of detail, LODs, right? So LODs were the whole concept of like you have a spaceship, it's far away in space, and really far, so you have a spaceship that actually has a different mesh and different textures that are much lower res because it's far away, and as it gets closer you can see the mesh expanding and the textures loading in higher res until you're right in front of it, and then you're like, wow, this ship looks amazing. And so the whole LOD concept is to stream basically from disk here, not the class on console, so it's DVD, to stream the game data dynamically to make it most efficient. And so I think it'd be cool if you guys implement level of details on the photos dynamically. So the photo only takes up enough for a thumbnail when you look at it in the gallery, nothing more. And then as you tap on it, it brings up enough screen res, and as you zoom in, it actually brings up more and more data.
So we're doing that in the very basic sense right now, in that you have the screen res version on the phone, you zoom in, you bring down the full res, and it paints real time. But
so it's just good to know that if I zoom in, I'll bring the whole res.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's a good action that I can use.
Yeah.
No, that's great. And so are you doing anything with audio and video as well? You said your video.
Right now, we're not doing anything with audio. We find that most people are streaming audio now. So there's certainly people that have I'm like one of them. You have thousands of gigs of MP3s. But we don't do that right now. We'll see if people ask for it, then let's go do it. Backup videos right now.
So quick, because I don't know, I people here we are, 13 megapixels camera.
13 megapixel camera.
And then you've got phase detect autofocus.
Yeah,
I believe.
that's right. Why you know all this?
I memorized the
pretty
specs
good.
on devices.
Yeah, so dual tone, dual LED
Dual
flash.
LED flash. You get dual speakers, 5.2
dual
inch
amplifiers,
screen. It's
full
1080p,
HD. Yeah,
right?
yeah. 5 megapixel camera in the front.
Correct. And then what's the battery size?
It's 2680.
2680.
We've also got NFC on the back.
Ah, yes.
Along with your fingerprint sensor.
Of course.
And it's going to launch with M, so we've already got M.
Android M.
So on my daily driver, which is a Nexus 5 right
you don't
now.
have a fingerprint scanner. You should update to a 5X. That way you get the
You know what? The problem is
scanner.
the software team is trying to support 2 devices right now. Nexus 5 and Robin. So right now we're trying to keep them focused. It's also got Qualcomm quick charge, so you can plug it in and get fast
Do you know which
update.
quick charge is?
2.0.
2.0.
Mm-hmm. USB Type C on the bottom.
Yeah, that's right. It's Type C. Yay, Type C.
Yay, Type C. I'm excited about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else is there? What else is there spec wise? I think it kind of checks. I would say it checks most of the boxes. I think right now, to be honest with you, it was. That's why I've got my designer in China this week. I'm going to China next week. Just making sure that we can get that thing, get it dialed in. It comes down to little stuff like the paint quality in this corner and making sure that we do we hit the level that it needs to hit.
I'm looking forward to it. I mean, it's it's as far as I know, the only phone success story that I know of that is a kind of a. I mean, you probably
I hope
think
that we're
it's a big brand with you and the other major players on your exec. Funding anyway, but then to get a phone on crowdfunding, I think you guys are the only ones who nailed it so far.
Yeah. I don't think there's anything else. Let me tell you. There's a couple other interesting things that happened for us on Kickstarter that were pretty remarkable. First of all, we met the goal in 10 hours. I mean, it was crazy. That first day, I'm telling you, it was crazy. It was so much fun. And then the next day, you're kind of like, oh, how many we sell today?
What's funny was when I wrote about, I was the first reporter to write about Pebble when I worked at Engadget. And before I worked for them, obviously, and it's exactly the same thing. I heard the same story from them. Like we were like, "Oh my God," because they reached their goal in no time as well.
It was incredible.
Yeah.
So I think we ended up somewhere in the 20, like the top 20 or 30 of tech projects ever on Kickstarter. So that's a lot. I mean, I bet honestly, the top 20 are like, there's Pebble up there, but the vast majority are like drones and 3D printers and that sort of stuff. So very expensive things. But in terms of consumer products, I would say we're definitely top 10, maybe the top 5. But I think the other thing that is remarkable, and I think this actually speaks a lot about what people want out of a company. Forget about the phone, but what people want out of a company is that if you were to take the top 100. We took the top 25 or 30 tech projects, and we looked at. Something like on 4.15 backer, 4 comments per backer.
Wow.
And that was when we closed.
That's amazing.
And what you find on the forums or on the comments areas is people asking questions, wanting to know how we made the decisions, how we developed the phone, what they didn't like, what they do like. That's number one. Number two is, we wanted to create a company where we gave people a say in kind of what we're doing. And so even though the phone was pretty far along at that point, like we can do small stuff like, let's do a crowdsourced colorway.
Yeah.
Where we asked people to input colors and the submissions from everyone. It was amazing. We had the craziest things, people out there, so many fresh ideas. Somebody just recently, he has a Nintendo 3DS and he has this game Stretch Mode, and he made a next bit level and he sent it to me.
Nice.
He sent it to me. So we loaded it up on a 3DS here and we're like, wow. It's so cool to see people excited about the new brand. And I think it just speaks to, first of all, yes, I think we struck a chord both in terms of design and kind of functionality and people, but I think it also strikes a chord like people are bored. They're bored of watching Apple and Google copy each other's features back and forth. And they're not bad features. There's good features in there, but they're not really moving the ecosystem forward.
Yeah, it's very stale.
That's on the software side. And then on the industrial design side, of course, we talked about that a lot. But yeah, I think I think it shows the appetite.
So are you familiar with Yola, who did the phone, the Sailfish phone? You know how they did a back that they opened the specs on the design of the back so that you could make your own backs, 3D print your own.
Oh, right.
And it had a
right.
set of connectors so you could create like accessories and stuff.
Yeah.
Is there any interest in potentially doing something like that in the future? Because I think, since you are a crowdfunding success story, one of the areas where people that resonates a chord with that more, but maybe give them the 3D drawing so that they can.
Our campaign, we released it. You're not going to stock in a Verizon store. You're not going to stock in a Sprint store. And so you get the list of requirements, and some of them hard, some of them easy, but they want to know a couple different things. They want to know that you're not going to take down their network.
Yeah.
So like, have they run that chipset on their network? So they want to know that. And then inevitably they'll get some service calls. And so they want to understand the device to an extent to make sure that to load we have to provide the IMEI numbers to them. They can load them in the system, but the consumer still has to call them and get the phone provisioned. So,
but it's going to look like a completely normal next bit.
It'll look like the same. It's the same. It's in the same form factor.
They pop, so it's the same phone.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. No bloat.
If you pop your AT&T,
it's actually not. No, but it's actually not. They're two different SKUs.
Oh, they're different SKUs.
Yeah. So you can't take you can't take the GSM version, which will work globally. You cannot take that one and put it Verizon or Sprint SIM in.
But the other way around, you theoretically could put.
In theory, you could. Yeah.
The SIM if you're traveling abroad or something.
For example.
Yeah. You won't stop that from happening.
Yeah. No.
Good. I mean, I'm asking because that's always the challenge, right? It's like there are very few phones that do all the networks right now. It's the Nexuses and the iPhones, really.
And iPhone, like we did it slightly differently, and this kind of just I think talks about being a startup company and kind of figuring out why you're doing Kickstarter. Is that we wanted to make one SKU because we thought that's what we could execute on as a company. And our biggest reach was, you hit AT&T and T-Mobile, and then you can hit a lot of the rest of the world with one SKU.
Yeah.
So that's the approach we took. Apple takes the approach of let's nail into the U.S. So let's hit all 4 carriers in the U.S. and we'll sacrifice some of the international bands, and then they have an international SKU.
Yep.
Same with the Nexi. So it's kind of just a slight. Maybe.
Only getting more complicated.
Yeah, there's more.
You can't. There's adding new bands all the time because they run out of spectrums.
Yeah, we had this interesting experience a little bit recently. So actually, if you look at, I don't have data on this, but if you look at people who are buying, say, Samsung or HTC,
right,
it's generally people over 35, generally speaking. Okay, there's lots of exceptions to that, but generally it's an older demographic.
So who are the young people buying phones? Where are they buying them from?
They're buying OnePlus, or they're buying Nexus. They're buying, they understand this direct-to-consumer model because $400 is still a lot for them.
Right.
Number one, or they're buying an iPhone. Their parents are buying an iPhone.
They're buying a Moto G because it's affordable.
Or the Moto G, exactly,
Right.
exactly.
Well, now the Moto X is pretty reasonable.
So when you actually talk to young people about this phone, first of all, they're like, "Oh, cool! I got a phone that makes me not look like everybody else. That's cool. That's cool." And then you like talk about the not running out of space. Oh my gosh! I mean, it's incredible. It's incredible.
So
they get it right away. So
on
on Kickstarter, we didn't. It was, I would say, our kind of key buyer was like 25 to 35, which makes sense. It's Kickstarter. You got to have disposable income.
Yep.
Because you don't know if the company's going to make it or not. But yeah, I think you look at we talk about people looking for something fresh. They are bored. They don't. This is going to sound terrible, so I probably shouldn't say it. I'm looking at our PR team. But if you talk to a lot of people, they don't want grandma's phone.
Right. That doesn't sound bad.
They want something that's fresh. They want something that's original.
Yeah.
They want something that speaks about kind of their values.
It's a reality.
Doesn't mean they want a crappy
No.
or crappy phone or a shitty
And that's,
product.
I think, what's
excuse my language, but they want something that's remarkable.
But I think that's actually one of the shifts we've seen this last year and a half, and OnePlus was a big driver of it. And I think it's that you can now buy phones in the $200 to $400 range unlocked directly from manufacturers, including the new HTC 189 that I just showed you, right?
Yeah.
And get a solid experience.
Yeah.
Like even the Moto G from day one.
Yeah.
It was like you did even.
You know, you can imagine that. Okay, I feel comfortable buying something if it's only $400 as opposed to $800. I can feel more comfortable about making that leap.
For sure.
Whereas before, if it's $800, man, you know it. You want a big company behind it. You want a big carrier behind it. You want everybody behind that to kind of ensure that you're going to have plenty of support.
Have you had a chance to play with the new OnePlus X? I have one, but I didn't bring it to show you.
I haven't.
It has a ceramic back. That's one of them. There's a SKU with ceramic back.
Yeah.
And it's really nice and heavy because of it. It's really kind of cool.
I've only seen the pictures. It reminds me a little bit about the iPhone 4 or 5, just in terms of basic construction.
But it's a lot of the detail is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they have like cut lines on the metal along the sides,
Mm-hmm.
kind of like what it's a look like
so glass will break.
See back in the day. Like I thought at the time of the 1X that that's what was going to happen.
It is. Though I mean, it is nails. So but you take that thing and you drive it.
There's all these new fangles today.
Yeah.
It's like I don't know.
I wish those guys. First of all, Carl, good guy, dude. I met him. given me a make editors. What I also right play.
Because junction in time,
It's a pretty big issue for next year.
It's a big issue because it's coming really rapidly, the mobile payment, and people are adopting it very rapidly. And
particularly in the US.
Yeah,
US,
and so
UK,
I felt it was an interesting, you know, an interesting oversight. But I think that, you know.
But you know what, to be fair, as a startup company, you're going to skin your knees,
Yeah,
you're going to bump your elbows.
But the thing is, you know, when I
stuff.
covered the OnePlus X launch a few weeks ago, 2-3 weeks ago, here in SF for Pocket Now, and it was a very much more humbled attitude. They were like, whoa, you know, we're in the US, we're launching here in the US for the whole world. So maybe we should, you know, I felt like they had, and they had learned their lessons in just the way they presented it, because to me, the phone was above my expectations in the end. Whereas with the OnePlus One,
the hype thing.
That when we fuss a bit much, right?
But it's a good look. It's a good phone, and it's definitely a good bang for your buck, you know, without a doubt.
And this is a good phone and a good bang for your buck. Is this a real one?
Is that one a real one?
That's not the real one.
No, that's a fake one.
Oh, no,
that is the real one. It's got my personal email on there, so
sorry,
careful.
let me. Can I dismiss these two?
Totally.
Yeah, there we go. Just wanted to show it a little bit closer so you guys can see. Hopefully, the video is actually in the right direction when you see it. But it's a really great phone. I really like. You see the little cloud there, with the LEDs underneath. I don't know if you can see they're not lit up, but they're there. This is a really great design, and you know, you can pre-order it, right?
You can pre-order. We have if you go to our website, you can definitely pre-order it. You can't get the Kickstarter special, and you can't get the Kickstarter color anymore.
What was the Kickstarter?
It was
color?
electric, so I don't have a sample of it here, but it basically had an almost black main housing and this very vibrant blue on the two end caps.
Oh,
so
right,
it's almost kind of like mixing
Those
midnight
two.
with mint together, but it was a pretty fresh, and that was the one that the community sourced. So we asked for a bunch of input, looked for a couple of on it. This orange one.
Of course,
It didn't. We're excited. I mean, like, look, we're definitely right now. Stephanie, our PR, she'll tell you this, that we are heads down right now.
Oh yeah.
And definitely, there's a lot of kind of balls up in the air. So we've got a lot of work ahead of us. But it's exciting. You know, it's super fun, and I've never been this close to this many parts of the business. You know, coming from HTC. So it's been really fun to actually see that.
You know, for me, it's just like about deciding what I want to carry in my pocket as my main phone for the next year or so. And so this year, I feel like I have choices, and I can't make up my mind, which just hasn't happened before.
What's your daily driver right now?
Well, right now I've got a 5X, an Nexus 5X, just because I got it recently. But I was on the A9 for a little while, and it's kind of a battle between these two right now for me. But I'm actually, you know, as soon as I get.
What do you think about the fingerprint on the back?
I love it on the back.
Yeah.
Look, it's great. I just unlocked. Like by the time you pull it out of your pocket,
that's interesting.
It's unlocked, right? Like you reach in there, you touch the fingerprint reader.
So would you like this version over what HTC did?
Yeah, I actually do. I think that, and I think for you guys, it's going to be the same. You'll be able to touch the fingerprint reader.
It'll be interesting once you start using it, get that feedback.
I get on your pocket. I think that's the key. But yeah, I'm looking forward to making this my daily driver for a little while because, you know, I think.
Well, hopefully we can deliver on the camera for you and everybody else.
Well,
because
you know, look, the reality is that
I know you're camera crazy.
but at that price point, I think that I'm my expectations aren't as high as a G4 or a GS6 or,
Mhm.
you know, look, the fact you made the decision not to have OIS, and to me that's important, but I think that it's also not a deal breaker, right?
Mhm.
Like, again, the OnePlus X doesn't have OIS and it's actually pretty decent.
Mhm.
The Nexuses with the large pixels this year don't have OIS and it's actually really good.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
yeah.
just, you know, you don't get a lot of people don't understand it. To me, it's about creativity. I like to be
Mhm.
creative with my photography, having the ability to not have to put it on a tripod when I want to get the light trail, but I know I can just brace myself really tight against the light pole
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
still get that
Yeah,
correction from
absolutely,
the camera is what
absolutely.
I'm after. It's not necessarily about, you know, and of course, yeah, you know, it's for video, it can be really helpful. As seen on the new iPhone 6s Plus, they didn't have it turned on last year, but you know, Nokia showed very early on how OIS could stabilize
Yeah.
video really well. So.
Well, let's see how we do. Like we feel,
but
we
that's the
feel
thing,
like
it's your first product. The way I think of it,
I'm not going to
hopefully-
bag on the camera. I'm just saying that we've got work there to do. We're on our third. We're about to go into our third tuning cycle, and I would say we're definitely probably those problems. Different pairs of silicon.
Now, like example, has OIS, but is that great of a
Work to get that stuff
because
to work
it
together.
is a lot of what makes a good camera.
Yeah, totally. And that's why even like on the, wasn't it on the M8 where it got terrible camera reviews at first, but it got better 3 months later or something
Well,
like
the
that?
software kept improving, but it's the truth of the M9 as well.
Yeah.
It came out as a little dismal, and then it got much better.
Yeah.
But with the A9, they nailed it out of the box.
Yeah.
So you know, it's just really hard. I think
It is hard, and the schedule, it makes it all tough to kind of get in there. But it's one of the most difficult. To be honest with you, it's one of the most difficult things on delivering a phone. By the way, even before Nextbot, I had a little bit of experience with this because you can blame me for the Ultra Pixel at HTC.
Oh, I don't blame you for it. I actually love the Ultra Pixel with OIS.
Yeah,
I felt that
yeah.
when you drop it, and you had to drop it because the dual camera, you know. Back in that the M wasn't better.
It'd be a at the time, except for
front-facing camera on the
Yeah.
market, right?
yeah. So it's still getting leverage.
So it's perfect.
It is great.
Yeah, no, I think look, it is what it is, and you know, back in the day of the butterfly, the J butterfly and the 1X, I could see the light, and to me the light was do what you're doing today, because the sensor I felt on the 1X at the time, other than speed, was really good in low light for its time. I said just add OIS to that.
Right. You know what's so cool about this is actually that the cameras have gotten so much better.
Oh my God.
I mean, it's incredible.
I know.
Like even the worst camera on a phone is
know.
still really good, and it's amazing to have this tool.
I know.
That's with you 24/7.
It's like the Moto G today for less than $200 if you buy the base model is better than most flagships 2 years ago in terms of imaging.
I know. I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing, and I think, you know, just kind of as we communicate people, whether it's, you know, through stuff like Instagram or Twitter or Facebook or Snapchat, whatever it is, it's just amazing that the quality level has gotten so much better. So you can really be super creative with it, and it's fun. You know, like who doesn't want to express themselves? So
we've run over an hour. I want to ask you one last question.
Yes.
It's a design question. Where do you think we're going to go from here? Like what do you think is going to let you be even more creative? Is it materials? Is it like screens that are shaped differently? We're starting to see screens that are a plastic AMOLED, so they're curved, like Samsung and the Priv from BlackBerry use. We also, you know, LG has done some interesting things like backing the plastic with leather. Unfortunately, they executed it really poorly, so it's wearing out terribly, as you can see.
It's difficult to do.
But
actually.
they also have slightly curved screen here. Very, very slightly, and is really interesting to hold and to feel.
Yeah, so there's a couple things. So I get a lot of questions about curve screens and stuff, and I guess my challenge has been on those is what value do they bring to the consumer? A lot of times, if you have a curve screen, you just get more reflections, and so I'm kind of like, I'm just not convinced, you know. In fact, when I looked at like kind of the flexible OLED, the coolest thing about the flexible OLED is that it doesn't break. You know, I mean, you just basically put it in there static, but it doesn't break.
You guys are using IPS, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't know, like right now I'm focused on delivering this phone.
Of course you are.
So it's hard to actually think about the next phone, to be honest
But
with you.
have there been things that, even when you were at GTC in your days, that, like we talked about ceramics, right? But have there been things that you thought, wow, I wish that somebody could push this direction of technology harder so we could actually make a phone with it in a year or 2 years or 5 years?
Oh, I'm trying to remember. I mean, ceramics were definitely one. It was disappointing when we figured out that it was very difficult to get this drive drop. So I'm interested to see kind of how OnePlus does that. Hopefully they solve it. I mean, because a lot of that stuff, like iPhone had a glass back, right? And yeah, there were some that broke, but it largely kind of survived. Kind of testing. It was great. You know, it was a non-scratchable back, and so it can be done. But what would be cool about ceramics is to take it beyond just like a inset piece of thing to actually having exactly.
Oh my God.
Having it have like a bigger enclosure would be that'd be super powerful, you know.
But you know, Kevlar on the back of their droids.
You know what, that stuff was, I know people got like raved.
But it's really strong. Like people really love
supplied though. You know, like I just don't. To me, you want unibody
material.
I want the materials to be authentic to what I don't want to try to like fake people out. Like what I hated more than anything was when I saw a phone where it was plastic and they brush it and plate it.
Oh my God. LG,
that was LG, Samsung, all that sort of stuff. I hated that stuff because to me, maybe not everybody could see it, but I'd look at it and be like, I could spot it a mile away. I'm like, that's not metal.
That's part of the problem with the GS3 and GS4 and GS5. That metal edge, that fake metal, plastic edge all the way around. That looked like it was metal, but if you looked really carefully in the corners, in the corners of the phone, you could see the mold line.
Yeah, and then like
I paid $650 for a phone where I can see the mold line.
I just like I kind of like the honest approach to kind of design, to try to not reinvent the wheel. It's not to say that that stuff's bad or some people don't like it, but just for me, I'd rather have something that feels authentic and that kind of feels natural. I mean, I think with Robin, I think you look at that and you're like, wow, it's different. It's still a phone.
Do you think that personalization is important at the factory, like Moto's doing with the Moto Maker?
I think that's pretty cool. You know, we're too small to actually kind of pull that off. And I'll be honest, I'd be surprised. It'd be interesting to see how long Moto can do that now that Lenovo is really cutting back on spending.
I honestly think the better approach is if you have a removable cover, or in like Nokia.
That's what OnePlus did, right?
You know, well, yeah, but Nokia has done even better or worse if you look at it. I mean, it's smarter, I think, but the glass and the plastic behind it is one piece, and then they literally wrap the back covers, not just the back. It's actually the edges as well.
Yeah.
And then as a result, you can buy a different color. You drop it, you get a scuffed. You most likely one of those pieces will get scuffed, not the glass.
Right.
You just get another one, you get a different color. I think that's actually brilliant.
It's pretty interesting. It's hard, you know, like that stuff is hard because you get basically double layers.
Yes.
So it makes the phone bigger. So then there's trade-offs. There's other trade-offs you make, like around battery size and all that stuff. But so I don't know where we're going to go with the next phone. I think that it's fun. I was just having a conversation. What is the DNA of the phone? Do you want to create a sibling to this phone? Do you want to create a cousin to the phone? And how do you define what the next bit design language is? It's weird because like I've always kind of had like a big portfolio where you're developing a design language around. And all of a sudden I've got one phone.
Yeah.
One phone. Iconic element, and
I think you nailed it.
But I also don't want to get stuck there, you know. Like
no, of course, but I think you nailed the iconic first phone look for this.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that was the goal.
Totally is. And you know, I have to say, as somebody who helps companies launch on crowdfunding, you nailed your launch.
Yeah.
I mean, between Eric on the team and Candace's company, and I mean, you guys are just.
Thank you so much. It's good to hear that.
Like I was just like, yep. Nice.
By the end of that month, man, we were wiped. And I'd be honest, and like everybody afterward, like on the forums, like, what happened to Nextbit for like a week? And they still want more information because there's so much out there in that month. And they get used to that cadence, and we're trying to give them more feedback and trying to kind of give them what's going on, but it's, it's hard.
Great.
Sorry, you got to feed the
Well,
beast.
listen, I want you to give you an opportunity to pimp your next bit, whatever you feel comfortable, so people know where they can find you,
Sure.
or the company or the product, if you don't want to do your own personal info, because I understand that.
Yeah, no, I mean, look,
Let people know where the Twitters and the links and the URLs and all the things
Yeah.
so that they can buy some phones.
I've tried. Listen, pretty
Yeah.
straightforward. Is it NextBitSys? Yeah,
At
so
NextBitSys.
NEXTBITSYS
On
is our
Twitter,
Twitter
yeah.
account, and I think that's the same for Instagram, isn't it? Yeah. So we have a pretty big presence on
Should people follow
there.
you on Twitter?
I share some things that are exclusive every now and then. Actually, more comes out on Instagram than it comes out on Twitter.
Okay, so you're Instagram.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm a designer.
True.
But I try to do both. I try to
follow.
put it out on both, but sometimes if I'm kind of short on time, one thing will go out and it'll go out on Instagram. It's on Snapchat.
Oh,
We
cool.
have a lot of people following us there.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Cool.
See, you're doing it right. So I'm gonna tell you about where you can find me. Of course, you know this already, probably tnkgrl.com. Drop the vowels, tnkgrl.com. That's my blog. If you're listening to the you subscribe to the podcast on my RSS feed. Yeah. On Twitter without the value KGRL. Well, stay tuned. More awesome folks like Scott, who really know the industry inside out, people that I've met in my many years of blogging that I feel can bring a really cool voice to the podcast, in addition to my colleagues in the media that I usually interview on the podcast, where we can give you something a little bit more interesting like what we did with Scott, but at the same time continue the more regular stuff, or where we actually talk about each phone in great detail. So stay tuned for more, and thanks for tuning in today on the tnkgrl Mobile Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for
Awesome.
being on, Scott. It was
Yeah.
really great to have you.
Awesome.
All right, cheers. Bye, everyone.